Will we gather in 2 minutes? We'll regather in
test,
2
test.
minutes.
Test.
If you want to A-B it with that.
You got feedback going.
This is not on, I don't.
Test, test, test. Oh, this one is ringing. Oh, geez. Look at the difference there. This one's at 35. Test, test, testing. And then I get nothing. Test, test. Testing, 1, 2. Test, test. Test, test. Testing, 1, 2. Test, test. Test, testing. Test, test. Testing, 1, 2.
All right, 1 more minute. We're going to do this thing. Check, check, check. All right, and you have your mic still?
You still?
Yep, that one, we're just going to leave it on.
Oh, okay.
Leaving a hot mic in front of her is just a risky proposition, a good thing.
Yeah, it is. It is very risky. You have no idea what you did here. No.
Hey, let me welcome you guys to a little bit of a unique Sunday. You probably already knew this from our publicity over the recent weeks, and I see many of you were at our early service. But as just a brief introduction for you, those of you that didn't get to meet them already, let me introduce you to Mark and Rachel Landrum. They serve as, well, are there other people, missionaries, as part of an organization called, well, their organization is their mission, International Mission to Jewish People. And what you either saw or will see today is Mark does a great job walking us through the Passover meal, and not only saying, here's how Jews celebrate the Passover meal, but here's where you get to go, especially with eyes of faith, that the Holy Spirit lets us go, oh, there's Jesus in that. It is not something different than a Christian celebration. Christ is actually there, and when you have eyes to see it, you get to see the richness of it. And that our goal in having them here is, one, that we get to support them. Two, that it enriches your celebration of the Lord's Supper at some key times this week, right? Monday, Thursday, Easter Sunday. So even as they begin, you got to hear more of their presentation and some of the nuts and bolts of their ministry, but I'm hoping that in this gathering, you get to hear more personal details. And so maybe let me start with this. If you guys would just start saying, what does your average week or month look like? Later on, let's talk about more how current political events have impacted that. But if you would just say, here's what your average ministry looks like, and then after that, give us a little bit of your personal story. How did you get to where you even want to be a part of that? And after they do some of those overview things, I'm going to walk around with a microphone. So I bet you already have some questions, all right? Let's do that. We're going to give them about 5-10 minutes here and just kind of share. And then let's just do a little bit of interaction and back and forth. Sound like a plan? Just kind of nod your head and go with it. But what are you going to do? Are you going to yell at me and boo? So thanks for your compliance with the...
But you're not hanging.
Yeah, it's not an option. Go ahead, if you guys would share a little bit about your mission and ministry.
just in case you were wondering, what does a missionary with international mission Jewish people do? Well, we drink a lot of coffee and tea, so did that, sit down, like basically what you see here, just us sitting down. It sounds like an amazing job, and it is an amazing job. So we sit down together with Jewish people on a one-to-one basis. Mark meets with men, I meet with women. And sometimes when a couple is interested in hearing more about Jesus, we sit down together with them as a couple. And so that's what we do. We make appointments with Jewish people during the week. It sounds like it's really a great fun. It is when we get the chance to actually get to the point that we can share the gospel with them. But getting to that point that a Jewish person is willing to sit down together with us and trust us enough to us to share the gospel with them, that is very hard to get to that point. Because if you were here in the first service, you saw the video, and if you're coming to the second service, you see a video that explains a little bit about what we do. But most Jewish people, there are many reasons, for that. But many Jewish people have a sort of like an inbuilt, Mark says, is an inbuilt resistance to the gospel. Various reasons, historical, cultural, social. But they think that they need to resist the claims of Jesus. So one of the first thing, well, let me actually ask a question. How many of you know a Jewish person? Oh.
Besides Jesus.
Besides Jesus. Okay, that's good. And here's a trickier question. Any of you have witnessed to that Jewish person? Okay, what do they say? Yeah, well, that is a typical sort of response. They're into their own religion. They think that believing in Jesus is they have to change to another religion, and that's the reason why. And if you were in the first service, Pastor Mark introduced us, and we said we're Jewish and we are Christian at the same time, and in itself is a
What's
testament.
a simpler way of saying that?
Oh, a simpler way of saying that. It was mentioned before. Thank you, Mar, for that question. We call ourselves Messianic Jews. That means Messiah is the same as the word Christian. Christian comes from Greek. Christ is from Greek, and Messiah is from the Hebrew. So it's exactly the same thing, but instead of saying we're Christian, you are Christian Jews, although some people call themselves that way, we call ourselves Messianic Jews. But most of the people that you would meet, that are Jewish and you are sharing your faith. Thank you so much for those of you who are sharing your faith with Jewish people. That's the most loving thing that you can do, not only towards a Jewish person, but anyone that doesn't believe in Jesus. But one of the typical responses would be, but I'm Jewish. That means that, that's the end of the conversation. This is not something...
That's what they hope.
They hope so. It doesn't work with us because we say we are Jewish too. So that's the thing, is that, they think that they need to change the religion, change their faith. Give up their identity. And most of the time, in many cases, when a Jewish person becomes a believer in Jesus, they will be ostracized from the rest of the family. And in very drastic cases, the family will perform a mock funeral for them, saying, you're dead to us if you are changing, in a sense, your religion. So because of that, a lot of people have a big resistance to that. So to get to the point where we actually get the chance to sit down together with them, that is a long process, a lot of prayer. Definitely, that's what we need, your prayers.
I think it's important at this point to explain a little bit of why there would be such extreme reactions, and that is because Jewish people don't typically see Jesus as the gentle Nazarene. Unfortunately, they associate him with a lot of persecution in history. You might not think much about things like the Crusades and the Inquisition, but Jewish people remember them and the Holocaust. and associate them all with Jesus, because all those groups claim to be Christians. And so that might help you understand why there's such a drastic sort of reaction sometimes to joining the people who did all that supposedly to us.
Would you summarize, just in case people don't immediately have a mental file of the Crusades, when you just kind of make a passing reference to that, what opens up in a Jewish mind? What was it, and what do they think about it?
Well, the Crusades were a time, and I went to a Christian school where the mascot was the Crusaders. And looking back on that, I just think how, and it was in a Jewish neighborhood, North Atlanta, sorry.
North Atlanta.
Yeah, North Atlanta, but it was a time of massacring basically anybody who didn't believe in Jesus. You die at the sword if you don't believe in Jesus. It's a lot like the Inquisition. You convert or die, and
Or flee.
yeah, or flee. So my relatives, our ancestors, flew from Spain, basically, ended up in Greece and Thessalonica during that sort of period of the Inquisition. As Americans and Australians, young countries, these things seem like ancient history, but in Jewish circles, it's still associated with Jesus.
It's still there in the mind and the psychic of the Jewish people. So whether they say it, sort of think it's conscious in their minds or not, but it's part of the history, and it's being passed on, sort of in the DNA of the Jewish people.
Yeah. I think somebody else asked a question earlier during the coffee time. Sorry.
Would you have a question?
It was you. Sorry, the pastor's mother.
Did you guys tell us how did you become Christians?
All right. Mine is faster. I'll go first. I came to faith primarily through my father's influence, who was a fine Christian man. So I really grew up believing that Jesus is the Messiah. We celebrated Christmas and Hanukkah and Passover and Easter. I went to that school I was telling you about on the Vista Road, and they would send us down to the Orthodox synagogue for PE. Jog down to the synagogue and come back, jog back. So that was part of our exercise program, I guess, PE. So for me, it always went together. But most Jewish people didn't have that, and most of our Jewish colleagues didn't have that. Rachel certainly didn't have that.
No, I was born in Romania, and some of you might have seen the video. And when I was 12, my parents and I moved to Israel. And the reason for that is because my dad was a Holocaust survivor, and he thought that's the safest place for us as Jewish people. In Israel, at that point, we sort of a little bit later on, my mother met another Jewish lady, also from Romania, that witnessed to her, shared with the gospel with her, and invited her to a Messianic congregation. You heard the word Messianic, a Christian Jewish church. But actually, that church was founded by a Lutheran mission, the Lutheran mission to the Jewish people that was based in Norway. It's a long story. There were a lot of Jewish people from Romania in that church, and this lady invited my mom. So initially she went there because of the social reasons. There were some other Romanian-speaking people. But that's where she became a believer in Jesus, and then she invited my dad and I to go to that congregation as well. We thought, that's nice to meet other Jewish people from Romania. But then God started working in my heart, and seeing other Jewish people there, where before that I knew that Jesus is not for us, for us Jewish people to consider, but yet in that congregation I met other Jewish people who believed in Jesus. It was a sort of a contradiction. Outside the congregation, most people did not believe in Jesus. Actually, the word Jesus in Hebrew was a taboo. It still might be today, but things are changing a little bit. But it was a taboo word. It's not something that, Jewish people at that time thought that if they opened the New Testament, God will strike them down from heaven because that's a bad book to read. It's not for us Jewish people. And inside the congregation, I met other Jewish people who believed in Jesus. So there was a sort of a contradiction there. And I wanted to find out the truth, but I wanted to find out that the truth that is Jesus is not. I can have a relationship with God without Jesus. So I took a very short class in Messianic prophecies with the pastor of the congregation, and we looked through major Messianic prophecies, and after every one of them, and towards the end of it, I figured out that there's no way that is another Messiah but Jesus. At the age of 18, I accepted Jesus as my Messiah and Savior, even if I knew that I had to go against the stream of most of my other relatives besides my parents. My dad didn't become a believer until a little bit later on. But the rest of our extended family and my friends, they didn't believe in Jesus. So I knew that I had to go against the stream of all of them, but I knew that I had to do that because I found the truth. That's the beginning of my journey with God and Jesus. But later on, I knew that God has called me not only to keep the faith to myself, although when I started as a secret believer because of all the persecution I've seen done to Jewish people who believe in Jesus in Israel. I kept my faith quiet, and a friend of mine and I, who became believers at the same time, we were very careful. So it's sort of like we're discerning. It's like, can we share with this person? Can we share with that person? We're not sure about that person that we can share about our faith. But out of being a secret believer, now I'm sharing Jesus with people on the streets and with any possible way that I can. As a matter of fact, before we came here last night, we were in Macon, and we got a chance to share the gospel with two separate people that God put it on our path. And so that's everywhere we are, but particularly in Sydney, where we are located, in Sydney, Australia, and wherever God puts us, we would share the gospel with people, and if they want to know more about Jesus. But we'll try to make an opportunity to every open door that we get, we share the gospel with people. And so that's, to us, it's the greatest job in the world to be able to, where we call ourselves sort of, actually it's one of the, a Jewish man that we were influential in him coming to know the Lord. He calls us, oh, you birthed me. You are my midwives. So that's what we consider us as. We're missionaries, yes, that's our official title. But we are midwives, and it's a great pleasure to actually witness new life in the person of Jesus when we share the gospel with Jewish people, when it's so hard to do that. Well, they come one by one, but it's a great pleasure to see God birthing new life through us.
Can you tell us why Sydney? You've lived multiple places. Why do you choose Sydney, Australia? Tell us about that location and then your intentionality of living there.
Well, it's actually God chose that location. It is a beautiful city. But originally, when I met Mark, he was already a missionary in Chicago. He was born here in Georgia, in North Atlanta. But he was called to be a missionary to the Jewish people in Chicago. And when I met him, and also I got my own calling, and also God put us together. So we served Jewish ministry in Chicago, and then a few years later, God led us to go and to London, UK, doing the same thing, the same calling. God hasn't changed our calling yet. It's still Jewish evangelism. And God led us from the UK, London, UK, into Sydney, Australia. It's a beautiful place. We enjoy being there. It's not an easy place to witness to people in general. The spiritual darkness that is there. A lot of people are into anything else but God. There will be into New Age a lot of times, and other religions. A lot of atheists, agnostics, and Jewish people are very much part of the society, exactly the same thing. So when you mention God, you think you're crazy, or it's not something that they would be willing to listen to anything else, about anything else but about God.
Are there a lot of Jewish people in Sydney? And if so, why that? Because I'm guessing the average assumption we have here is we picture New York, we picture Israel, we picture Eastern Europe. Why would there be a pocket of Jewish people in Sydney?
Well, actually, there's been Jewish people in Sydney pretty much since the beginning of the nation of Australia, or the colony. Came on ships like the Mayflower. But in recent times, there was a huge influx after World War II. I think they were trying to get as far away from Europe as possible, and they succeeded. And as we say in the video, we can relate to that to some degree, because we're both children of survivors. Well, like I say in the video, it's about 110,000, I think, nationally.
That they identify, but some others that do not identify. So major cities that are Jewish people, they're in Sydney, where we are, and in Melbourne. And we have a new colleague that started last year in Melbourne that is sort of covering witnessing to Jewish people in Melbourne. But yes, there's, especially in the area where we live, it's a lot of Jewish people.
Sometimes we call it Tel Aviv on the Pacific. Yeah, there are a lot of Jewish people.
Tell about how your most immediate context, recent historical events, how does that, certainly Israel's in the news, I think it captures the attention of a couple of people here, that they're interested in those storylines. How does that impact your day-to-day ministry now, perhaps similar or different to how it was even a year ago?
Well, it's changed a lot in recent times. After October 7th, Jewish people have taken a much lower profile. To tell you the truth, when we first moved to London, I thought the British Jewish people kept a lower profile out of fear. But in Australia, it's got raised to a whole nother level, because anti-Semitism since October 7th has risen in Australia more than 700%. In fact, we had an outreach already scheduled 5 days after October 7th at a New Age festival, because a lot of Jewish people come to that. And in previous years at that same outreach, Jewish people, because we're wearing Hebrew shirts and we have a sort of a Jewish sign above the booth or the stall, they would come up to us immediately and say, "I'm Jewish." This time, 5 days later, already, it would take 10 or 15 minutes into the conversation before they would say, "I'm Jewish," or reveal their identity like that. So, whereas we used to do a lot of marketplace evangelism, like out on the streets and in a public square, they're not going to talk to us if we're identifying as Jewish, because there's so much fear. People don't feel safe.
Their fear of safety for their own person because of anti-Semitism that's going. I think in Israel, sorry, not in Israel, in Australia, the Opera House was lit with the Israeli flag support. Immediately after October 7th. For 1 day, and then immediately the following day was a huge rally with pro-Palestinian and pro-Hamas, people saying "Gas the Jews," and so it's not a surprise that Jewish people feel unsaved. unsafe. Sorry,
Unsafe.
unsafe to identify themselves as Jewish.
So we need a lot of prayer to find new methods of reaching Jewish people.
So it is a change in a sense of the way that we have to go around, finding Jewish people that are open for us to share the gospel with. But on the other hand, the same outreach that Mark was mentioning before, we've been other times before, other years before, and we met some other people there that were Jewish that they heard about our booth. By the way, the name of the booth is still called, when we do that again, is going to be Sar Shalom Pathway, which means the Prince of Peace pathway. So that was a very pertinent message talking about the peacemaker. But there were some Jewish people that we met previously that were not interested in hearing our message. But this time, because this was fresh, October 7 was so fresh, and most of the people that we talked to there had family in Israel. So one of the ladies says, "Tell me again what is the peacemaker all about?" So that was an opening, because really they really need the peace that Jesus gives. And I was talking to another Israeli there, and about the atrocities that happened, and when I share with him about what our message is all about, he says, "We definitely need a peacemaker." And so this is a great opportunity for us to have an input in people's lives. And actually, not only us as Jewish people who believe in Jesus, but also you as Christians. One of the things that is extremely powerful in witnessing to Jewish people is the love of Christians. Because a lot of times when Jewish people see the love that Christians have for Jewish people at this particular time, it's mind-boggling to them. They say, "Well, the whole world hates us. Wow, you love us? That is amazing." And that gets their attention.
Yeah, in fact, Rachel said there, and it's very true, there's constant rallies and demonstrations pro-Hamas. But a Christian organization sponsored a rally in support of Israel and Jewish people. And a lot of Jewish people went to it, and they were amazed that so many Christians were there. And one lady I talked to previously told me that she never thought she would live in times that were like what her parents described to her in pre-Nazi Europe, or just, as the Nazism was on the rise, they described how things were for Jewish people. She said, "I never thought I would live in those kind of circumstances." But she said at that rally, there were a lot of Christians, and that really touched her. In fact, I'm pretty sure she used the word, "That was very touching." So just like Rachel was saying, it's a good witness, just that little seed plant like that.
Would it be okay if we switch to kind of taking some questions here?
Yes.
I'll start off, so you guys keep thinking. My first question that I'm wondering as I'm watching your presentation is, so we're very familiar with the institution of the Lord's Supper.
Yep.
And we know the context that it was in the midst of the upper room and the Passover celebration. So of the things that you described, how Jews today celebrate the Passover, the events that we know of, right? Our Lord Jesus Christ, on the night when he was betrayed, took bread. When he gave thanks, he broke it. Where in the midst of the flow that you described would those institution of the Lord's Supper events, words, and things have happened?
Yeah, I'm afraid I might not have been that clear, but when I pulled out that matzah, and which you'll see in the next one if you weren't there, out of this pouch, the middle layer is taken out and literally broken. So when he said he broke bread, he really did break. It wasn't sort of torn, it breaks because it's hard. And so that would be sort of the part. Having said that, the word afikomen is Greek. So that sort of part of the tradition might have been developed around the time of Jesus when Greek was common in Israel. And what was the other? Oh, the third cup. See, I don't know if y'all noticed, but this cup is different. It's deliberate. This is the third cup, and because that is the real focal point, and that is the cup to which he said, "This is my body, my blood, poured out for you." It was the third cup, the cup after the meal.
So yeah, so basically it's one cup as well. So there's one cup. Mark has 4 cups there, but for the presentation to show that each cup is a different name, but it's one. Every person has one cup, but it's being drank from 4 times, and each time has a special name. And the third cup that Mark was mentioning is the cup of redemption, and that is taken together with the piece that is being broken, called the afikomen, which is hidden and then brought back after the meal. So that is the time that after the meal, because it says in the scriptures, after the meal, he took the cup. And so that's the cup of redemption. And everybody knew at that meal that the cup after the meal would be the cup of redemption from Egypt. But he took it and elevated it. This is not only from Egypt, redemption from Egypt, but it's a redemption for all of us.
From sin.
From sin.
Yeah.
So I assume that you grow up in Passover. There's a rite and a ritual, and as soon as kids are little, they know what comes next. You know, is it the time where I get to ask the question, search for it? And I assume the disciples, as faithful Jewish boys, would have piqued their attention when they said, wait, Jesus just went off script for a moment. What would have been their mindset, you know, saying, wait, he's doing a different thing here? Am I right in assuming that would have been like, wait a second, and they lean in and notice the difference?
Well,
I would think so, but
I think that it's hard to know because we weren't there and the scripture's not really saying.
I wasn't there either, I'm just guessing.
Yes, yeah. So it's not something we can say for certainty. But basically, one of the things I would say is that I think that people around him, especially these disciples, noticed that he had authority that wasn't, other rabbis, because there were other rabbis or teachers around that they had a court of people around going, sort of with him and as they were taught around. And so he had a different, they noticed that he had a different authority. So when he said, this is something, yes, this is it, it still, talks about the bread of affliction, talks about that, but he added something to it. I would say, like, wow, that's, I don't know. That's basically, it didn't seem like they said in the scripture that they questioned that.
But often it says, you have heard it said, but I tell you. So they might have been kind of used to him adding
stuff.
They get to go, he's Jesus, he gets to do this.
Yes,
right.
yeah.
All right, questions that you might have, and there could be layers. It could be their personal experience as Christians. It could be their connections with the Jewish population. It could be their ministry. It could be elements of the presentation. Sharon, would you start us off?
Just wondering, in your experience with Jewish people, how many are celebrating and recognizing traditions and, like all in, and how many are Jewish and their parents were Jewish and their grandparents were Jewish, but really otherwise you really wouldn't know?
Well, the majority of Jewish people are probably like the latter category. You wouldn't necessarily know unless they told you. But they would probably do something for Passover, even if outwardly you might not have any idea that they're Jewish unless they told you so.
So a lot of Jewish people would still keep the traditions. Friday night, for example, which is, that's when the Sabbath comes, because all Jewish holidays, including the Sabbath, is the night before they start. So that's major, even if they don't go through a lot of traditions, but gathering together as a family to celebrate the Sabbath, or especially so Passover would be one of those holidays that even if they don't celebrate anything else, they would celebrate that. Like some people would that grow up in the Christian tradition, but they go to church on Christmas. That would be the same thing for Christmas, sort of like Passover is like Christmas, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is one of the other times that they would go to synagogue. But most of the Jewish holidays are family-oriented, so there would be a meal that they will get together. And in many places that I experienced with unsaved Jewish people, Passover, they would get to the point of doing some of the traditions up to the
liturgy. Yeah.
liturgy, up to the meal, and then the meal comes, and we'll forget about the rest of it.
Another question, if we could.
Okay, this is only what has been told to me. That there is a group of Jewish people in Jerusalem who are gathering money, and it's becoming, a lot of money, to rebuild the temple, because they feel like they need to go back to having sacrifices. Do you know of this group and what's happening with that?
I've heard of sort of like, I think there's a book called Ready to Rebuild, and it's been around for a while, and I heard they are stockpiling materials and things like that, and looking for a red heifer and things like that. I think they found one in Alabama, but anyway. It has to be an unblemished, and
So there are extremely strict requirements for that.
so yeah, I have heard about that. I haven't seen anything of it, but I have heard things like that.
So the group of people you're talking about is the rabbis, and the group, the name of the group is the Institute of the Bible, Bible Institute, or something similar to that. And they, it's like you said, they feel that what they've done so far, because see, when the biblical for example, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, almost everything, and there were sacrifices in the temple. The temple was destroyed. So what do we do now? That's what the rabbis got together at that time, and a group of rabbis, not all of them, a group of rabbis, and they said, well, now it seems like we have to change things because there's no more temple to sacrifice, and so they instituted 3 things instead of sacrifice: prayer, fasting, and good deeds. That takes the place of the sacrifices. But as we know, that's not God's intention. So that's why this group now are trying to figure out that what they're doing now, prayer, fasting, and good deeds, is not adequate. They need to go back to doing all that preparations to rebuild the temple, the 3rd temple. For us as missionaries to Jewish people, that's great news, because that indicates to us some of the Jewish people realize that what they've done so far is not adequate enough, and they need a substitute for that, of course, and we can come up with showing them that it's actually Jesus. So that's this amazing thing that we can we can use that.
Another question over here.
Our Thursday morning Bible class is currently studying the book of Isaiah, and it's a deep book, and some of the members of the class and some of us have done some deep research into particularly Isaiah chapter 53. We're coming up to that, and we have found out in some of our research that Isaiah 53, that so much talks about the Messiah, or predicts the Messiah. He was pierced for our transgressions. By his stripes we are healed. that in the regular rotation of Old Testament readings in the weekly synagogue worship, they will read Isaiah 52 and then eliminate Isaiah 53, what we kind of call the Messiah chapter, and then go over to 54. And we're wondering if you can enlighten us about that.
Yeah, that's very true. They do not look at Isaiah 53 until much later in the education system. In fact, Rachel has an amazing story from her own personal experience about that.
In Israel, where I grew up, I went to a regular school, not a religious school, and even there we study the Bible, that is the Old Testament only, and that's exactly what happened. When we got to the book of Isaiah, we went from 50, 51, 52, 54. And actually, at that time, I was already going to the Messianic congregation, and I heard about that chapter. And actually, many places, actually, this is called the forbidden chapter, because it's not forbidden for Jewish people to read that, because when you read it, you'll see it so clearly talks about Jesus. And I was the only one in the whole class, a large class, about 40 pupils, that asked the teacher, wait a second, why are we skipping this? And he was an Orthodox man. He mumbled something, he blushed, he mumbled again, but he didn't really give him an answer, because he read it and he knew what it was all about. He didn't want any controversy in his class. So it's very much so to the point that Jewish people don't even know that is actually talks about Jesus in their own. And Mark has actually a story. Do you want to say that?
Yeah, I was just remembering. My dad had a copy of a very Jewish Old Testament looking. It had this special cover on it, so that when he held it up in front, it was obviously a Jewish Bible. And he read that very passage to my aunt. And she thought that he was somehow reading from the New Testament, because it speaks so clearly. It is not generally read, but it is powerful in witnessing.
Thank you. Jim, you got a question? We have about 4 minutes left.
Okay. So thank you for being here. And we have a lot of friends who are not, some friends who are Jewish, but we really don't know about it until later. And especially coming from the Midwest, where there are very few Jewish out in the farming communities and so on. However, the same can be said a lot for Christians. If you didn't know, we don't generally go around saying everything. But one exception seems to be the Orthodox, I think it's the Orthodox Jews you see in the bigger cities and traveling with there's no doubt. What is the difference between the Jews who don't say much about? Obviously, there's something there. Can you explain that a little bit, what those two groups are?
Yeah, one is secular, basically. The other is extremely religious and very Orthodox, and they have sort of sanctified the dress of 17th or 18th century Eastern Europe. So that black outfit that they wear and the special expensive hats are from a couple hundred years ago. It was normal, but now they have decided that is...
That's what identifies them as Orthodox Jews. But, so basically Jewish people are very much like the rest of the society in the world. It goes from one spectrum to another. You find secular people, agnostic, atheists, all over. Sorry?
Sort of nominal.
Nominal Christians and all kinds, and then people that take their faith in Jesus seriously, and they walk with God. So it's the same thing with Jewish people. You have a wide spectrum of them, very much so. So we minister to all of them, and so it's so every person comes with different challenges. So that's what we share with people on an individual basis. So it's the same thing as the rest of the society. And some people call themselves traditionalists, Jewish people, that is. Means that they celebrate the traditions like Passover, but no really seeing any connection between that and God. It's just they're seeing that as part of their identity.
All right, we have time for one more question. The only reason I cut it off is because our band is going to warm up, and you can they'll be around here. They're here for the next service. You just might have to ask them a question with a little bit of the band warming up in the background, so it'll be a musical question.
I'm just curious if you have any friends or family members that personally experienced what occurred on October 7th.
Yes, as a matter of fact, one of our colleagues, one of his nieces was in one of the kibbutzes at that time, and it was so difficult for him, because he's going around. His ministry is in Holland, but he has family. He's Israeli like me, and so he has a lot of family in Israel, and it was very hard for him to, because that's personal pain, to go around talking to people about hope when it was so devastating for him. And yes, we have another former colleague that also the same thing. I think he was his cousin, is a cousin or an uncle that got killed as well. It's very devastating to see that, and we definitely need prayer. That especially, my heart goes to the hostages and the families of hostages. That they don't even know if they're still alive or dead. So yeah, we need a lot of prayer for that, and the ultimate prayer is that through this horrible pain and suffering they're going through, they will come to look up to God and see Jesus.
Thank you very much, both sharing professionally and sharing personally. You guys have been generous with us with your time, with your stories. Would you join me in just saying thank you once again? And with that then, they're going to be around. They might need to do, a brief break and refresher, getting a drink of water and the chance to sit a little bit, but they'll be around here. Obviously, they're helping lead our late service as well. Stay for a second service. I will. You can do more than one service. Doesn't hurt you, that kind of thing. But I think you'll find that. And please feel free. God bless you all. Have a wonderful day.